Hi everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Riley from CB Insights, and I'll be walking you through a few housekeeping items before turning it over to Matt for the presentation. First, don't worry about taking any notes because we'll be sending both the slides and the recording to you right after the webinar. Second, if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, your best bet is to reach out to the Citrix Help Desk. You can also tweet at us or send an email to webinar@cbinsights.com, and we'll do our best to help. But again, we'll send everything out afterwards, so don't worry too much. So as with all our webinars, we'll be moving through a lot of data and insights and doing it pretty quickly. But we also want to make sure we're answering your questions and keeping this relevant. So throughout the webinar, feel free to ask us questions using the questions tab within GoToWebinar or via Twitter using the hashtag #SmartGov. Okay, so just some quick background on CB Insights. We're a data science and machine learning organization backed by Pilot Growth Equity and the National Science Foundation. We track every private company in the world and all the investment activity and financing related to them to help our clients answer questions about major trends, competitor strategy, potential disruptors, and much more. Here you can see a few of our happy customers. Now a little on Matt. Matt is a senior research analyst here at CB Insights and a graduate from Northwestern University. He's been published dozens of times in publications including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times, and more. He also launched and currently runs our insurance tech newsletter here at CB Insights. And I'm going to hand it off to him for the presentation.
Great, thanks, Riley. So I'm just going to get started here with in the next 20 minutes, we'll discuss a few things and do sort of a high-level overview of both the government technology market as well as sort of the tie-in to the smart cities movement. So we're going to be going through a bunch of different areas and hopefully we'll save some time for questions at the end. So what do we categorize initially to start as GovTech? So primarily we're looking at companies that encompass the technologies that allow governments to become more efficient and better deliver services to their citizens. Companies here primarily have the public sector as their target customers and span a variety of different use cases, whether that's in transit planning, helping with water management, data storytelling platforms, and others. So when we look back at sort of where we are today at the GovTech market and where we've been, we look at this article from 2014. This is from the launch of Ron Buchanan's GovTech Fund, which is a small seed fund launched with $23 million in capital. And in 2014, you see a quote here, in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a wave of capital coming into the space. From the GovTech perspective, we're building an ecosystem, and there's a decades-long innovation cycle that needs to happen, not just for the U.S., but globally. So when we think about this market, why is change sort of being enabled now versus before, or in some cases later? So what are some of the trends that might be enabling some of the innovation to now sort of really be making its mark into government? State and local government, for one alone, is a massive industry. I mean, if you think about most of the sort of even some of the smaller cities. Even some of the smaller cities and counties would rank sort of among the Fortune 500. There's 19,000 cities and towns in the U.S. And if you look at sort of IT budgets within states and local governments, projected to grow pretty rapidly through 2020. So even being able to sell sort of a niche software to governments and local governments can yield significant opportunities. Of course, we are seeing obviously the shift also from to SaaS-based models and cloud-based models from consulting and more on-premise technology that we saw in government before. Obviously, sort of there's also not just citizens, but also sort of government employees. If you think about satisfaction with digital services from the government, just a poll done by Accenture a while back, that 73% of consumers were either neutral or not satisfied with digital services from their government. And while startup innovation in government, we have seen a number of different companies emerge, and this, as far back as 17, 20 years, startup innovation in government is still extremely nascent. If this is a good chart we like from NFX Guild, and while tech startups have invaded sort of a host of different markets, if you think about fintech, which we spend a lot of time analyzing and looking at data across the startups there, it's much paler in comparison from a startup formation and funding perspective when you think about government versus fintech and also healthcare as well. So are we sort of now at the stage where we're going to see sort of more startup formation and innovation from startups now impacting the government sector? The other thing that we've noticed as of late is VC interest in GovTech and urbanization has quietly picked up. So we talked about sort of the GovTech fund that launched in 2014, the quote that we featured at the beginning of the presentation. But we're now seeing interest in the space from larger multi-stage funds, and you sort of see this quietly picking up. So if you look at some of the different comments that have been said recently, General Catalyst, for example, mentioned, so they're focusing on what seems like an underground movement in urban tech or urbanization technology. Lightspeed Venture Partners mentioned government and civic tech as an area they want to get behind in 2017. AngelList, which has a broad overview of a lot of different startups across different industries, mentioned that a partner there, Alex Pack, mentioned that government technology is a sector he's most excited for in 2017, and the reasons for these are various. The other thing that we've noticed is that there are now organizations that have developed in the last few years that have helped support and scale entrepreneurship in government. So if you think about an organization like Code for America, which pairs sort of teams of technologists with local governments, that organization now counts over 130 alumni and fellows who have gone on to start companies in government technologies and smart cities, companies like Remix and Ride Along, and also was also operating a accelerator for startups back in 2014, 2013 for companies in the government sector as well. Obviously, sort of on the back of sort of this interest level is the rise of open data in government. There was a survey from Socrata a little while back that 44% of federal respondents have open data investments planned over the next 6 months. And we've seen startups and tech companies that are using and analyzing sort of the massive pools of open data to sort of build better tools and services for government and cities. Here you see sort of a screenshot from the very popular commuting app City Mapper, which was largely built on the fact that open data sets opened up in London and New York, which allowed the company to build this this tool that they offer to consumers and also expand it to other cities. And now you sort of see City Mapper has developed its own sort of set of tools advanced enough to let it actually add new cities without any open data being available, which they sort of wrote about a little while back when sort of launching in Istanbul. There's also sort of more of a argument now, or at least a belief that startups are finding ways to get past the sort of notorious prolonged sales cycles within government. Here you see a selection of various startups, or not startups necessarily, but companies selling technology into government. So if you think about a company like GovDelivery, which actually merged with Granicus in 2016, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now in sort of 1,800 public agencies, public sector agencies, founded in 1999. Conversely, a company like Remix is a Y Combinator-backed company that sells sort of planning software to transit agencies, founded in 2014, but is quickly scaled to about 200 plus transit agencies globally, and others you see there with OpenGov, which is scaled to about 1,400 agencies founded in 4 years ago in 2012. So, is this argument that startups are finding their way past prolonged sales cycles, which may obviously enable sort of more investment into startups that on that belief that this sort of hurdle has now been surpassed. We'll talk a little bit more about the sort of converse to that a little bit later, but why don't we look first at sort of the GovTech market today. So when we look at sort of funding trends, so investment to GovTech startups over time, we have seen significant growth in investment to startups and technology companies in government. If you think about funding to GovTech startups from 2012 to 2016, we saw funding growth grow about 305%. That said, I think government technology funding from a market perspective is still pretty small compared to other markets, especially those that are sort of more lagging in terms of sort of old industry that we've seen, and we think about sort of 336 million in total funding in 2016. I think we haven't yet seen sort of an explosion of both startups and as well as as well as sort of the investment to back up those companies who are targeting government as their primarily customer when we look at just the 5-year trend of funding investment. So definitely something to watch for, especially as we've seen some of that quiet interest picked up among venture investors who are talking more about government as an area they're interested in. When we talk about sort of looking just at U.S. startups and where government technology companies are focused geographically based on their headquarters, we have seen more than 20 states that have seen a GovTech startup pick up an investment since 2012. So significant diversity among the headquarters of where these companies are based, areas like Virginia and to DC to others. That said, we have seen sort of California take about 40% of all deal activity to GovTech since 2012 when it comes to startup deals in the space. When we look at stage, we have seen sort of deal share to seed deals in GovTech drop. That said, I think it's a little bit nuanced in the sense that there are more deals now happening in GovTech in 2016 than there were a few years back. So we also see a host of companies actually who raise growth equity financing in government technology, those that have operated for maybe the greater part of 10 years, who just recently may have picked up a growth equity financing round from investors to spur sort of further growth. So and when we think about with the diversity of where those deals have happened, where the sort of that 336 million went to over in 2016. It's a diverse array of companies. Here's just a handful of them. Think about Mark 43, which we'll talk a little bit more about, selling sort of law enforcement information software to police departments. We talked about some of that. I just mentioned some of the growth rounds to companies that have been operating for a while. One example of that would be CityWorks, a company backed by Polaris Partners and Blue Cloud Ventures to provide sort of public asset and land management software for local governments. You see, obviously, we mentioned Remix, but transit agencies, software tools. Translog also raised a round from Fontanalis Partners, among others, as well as others like Seamless Docs, which is providing sort of form automation software and a platform backed by firms including Motorola Solutions, Venture Capital, and GovTech Fund. So definitely a diverse array of companies that are looking to sell different software to governments and where sort of those where the different function areas within certainly local governments. So when we think about GovTech overall, can we think about can technology power, for example, more transparency? Open data solutions, we mentioned sort of this move towards the open data movement. And now you're seeing sort of open data solutions looking sort of a far cry from, well, not necessarily when, but as cities continue to release these data in PDF form, but starting to see some cities start to think a lot differently about sort of promoting transparency and putting sort of investment dollars towards new initiatives. OpenGov, for example, acquired sort of open data and performance management solutions provider Ontadia in April 2016, which has enabled it to sort of offer its sort of open data platform. And you see a host of different cities who here on the right, on the left there, who are now taking sort of initiatives in stride, and you can basically search a list of headlines of different communities and counties that are starting similar initiatives from Long Beach here to Denton, Texas to Campbell County. So a lot more of this where you sort of see those actual investments being put to work to spur this as an initiative moving forward. To the converse to that, in terms of when we talk about sort of selling into government and maybe those sales cycles coming down is Vista Equity Partners, which is a pretty smart money PE firm, which does a lot of sort of software M&A, and we saw sort of them acquire one of probably the most notable transaction in government technology last year was sort of acquiring Granicus as well as GovDelivery, and then merging the two into a combined entity. You see a quote here from Vista co-founder Brian Schatz that's saying, we believe technology will play an increasingly important role in both enabling sort of the legislative processes that keep our communities running efficiently, as well as ensuring communication. And the fact that it is possibly still very hard to sell into these into local governments if you think about sort of gov delivery and the amount of sort of goodwill and also sort of the amount of sort of local governments they were working with by the time Vista Equity acquired them, you know, in the sense that being able to acquire sort of the host of agencies they're already working with, merge the two, and some of them already sort of working with the same local governments, so sort of that opportunity rather than sort of for a lot of the startups who have to build from the ground up, and you see sort of Vista looking at that as an example, and we see that here with that notable transaction. You know, can technology also power sort of a better police force? We mentioned Mark 43 a little bit earlier, a company that's raised $40 million in venture capital to help reduce admin work and manage and share information into, you know, the more than 18,000 police departments. Here you see a slide from one of their presentations around the work they're doing with the Washington, D.C. Police Department. So certainly helping to sort of, you know, more seamlessly process reports, process arrests, and sort of manage downtime for police departments like Washington D.C. and others. You know, can technology also power sort of better performance benchmarks? So, you know, I think one of the major goals for new technologies within cities and local governments will not just be to sort of leverage their own data to generate insights and better dedicate resources, but also sort of compare and contrast, you know, those trends with those of other cities and benchmark themselves. Live Stories is doing some interesting work. It started backed by True Ventures to provide a data storytelling platform aiming to make it easier for government organizations to share and explore their data. And as I mentioned, will sort of new technologies that we're seeing emerge finally enable some of this more seamless benchmarking than we've seen in the past between governments and doing that in a much more efficient way using software. So some of the things, you know, that we're watching for in GovTech, you know, one of the companies that has been talked about, and we released our Tech IPO pipeline report in December, is Excella, which is a 17-year-old SaaS company offering, you know, a civic engagement platform for government agencies. A lot of talk about, you know, them replacing their CEO in October 2016. And possibly, you know, an impending IPO coming. You see sort of some of the data on their most recent Series E round in 2015 from the CB Insights database, and you know, reportedly working with more than 70% of the 50 largest U.S. cities. So, will sort of a GovTech exit or a notable IPO, will that sort of spur more interest as well into this sector? Remains to be seen. You know, nuances into selling government. We mentioned that there's sort of this belief that it is easier to now sort of avoid those protracted sales cycles. Then again, you know, if you and a lot of the sort of contracts and sort of meeting notes of sort of startups that are selling into local government agencies are actually publicly searchable. And there's been some studies done that they're finding that, you know, while cities and counties are increasingly finding the value in open data, the cost allotted to these software providers, depending on the county, can be very uneven. You see some startups who are able to, you know, get past sort of a longer procurement cycle by selling under a certain budget amount. And you see that here in this 2015 study that KPCC did, looking at Socrata and OpenGov contracts, and sort of the variance in how much sort of each city is paying for that software. And a lot of this data, as I mentioned, is available publicly. So, you know, not just sort of the ability to get into government, but how, you know, the other part of obviously SaaS software is being able to provide the value in the software to be able to and also do that at a price point that can, you know, eventually lead to, you know, profitable and you know, in many cases for the startups that are operating now, venture-backed opportunity, and we're sort of seeing some of that variance here, as you see, in sort of the nuances, obviously, in selling to government are very complex. So we're just going to quickly go through some of the trends we're seeing in smart cities at a high level. This is a map that we put out earlier this weekend. This obviously doesn't take into consider all the different areas where we see smart city startups working out, but there are a notable, you know, array of different areas where we see startups that are helping to improve cities. So these are companies that are not necessarily selling to local government. Many of them are, but also, you know, just helping to power everything from traffic data to weather to parking to water usage. And you see sort of the reverse array here, whether that's in transit data, and we mentioned some of the providers there already, companies that are helping smart transport, so sort of helping to augment some of the sort of public transit areas like in shuttles, as well as so a lot of the new bike services. China has been a big market for some of the startups there that have very quickly grown, like Mobike and Ofo. So these are sort of not necessarily the Uber and Lyfts of the world, but companies that are sort of operating in shuttle and bike. We see connectivity companies like Venium, which are looking to sort of provide, the connectivity layer for smart cities. We're also seeing, and we'll mention sort of another enabling factor for water software, and we're seeing a host of different interesting companies emerge there. So here's just some of the companies here that are operating within smart cities, and definitely a growing area that we're certainly watching over time. The other thing that's obviously been in the news is just the bigger names that have gotten involved in the smart cities movement. So Google, for example, launched Sidewalk Labs to help fix cities in 2015. Uber earlier this month launched its movement tool to help urban planners. It had earlier sort of worked with city planners in Boston to do something, but this was sort of one more formal effort. Y Combinator also now has a sort of new cities initiative that they're working on, and globally in China we saw Alibaba's Ant Financial, which worked with is working with over 300 cities to help build new smart cities, whether that's providing sort of multiple mobile public services, credit system construction, and others. So you see sort of the bigger names, not just the startups, but the bigger name tech companies, as well as in the telecom sector like Verizon, getting involved with sort of the smart cities effort. So similar to GovTech, can we see sort of smart cities company or startups in smart cities and sort of smart cities solve areas like waste management, for example? Rubicon Global is one company that's does not own any trucks or disposal centers, but works with over 5,000 small hauling businesses, and actually tripled its revenue last year to 300 million. They signed their first municipal contract with Atlanta relatively recently, but if you think about companies like Waste Management and Republic, which are working with over we're working with over 2,700 municipalities. Obviously, sort of you can see sort of the opportunity for companies like Rubicon Global and others, where we see sort of smarter waste management. And smarter water management. We mentioned some of the companies. There's some companies that are doing some interesting work, like Pluto AI and Imagine and others. And we also have seen initiatives like, we mentioned Code for America as an organization that's helped sort of scale entrepreneurship, and especially in government. Imagine H2O has been an accelerator that's been operating and has worked with over 350 water technology-focused accelerators and helping these companies at the early stage. So certainly has been an enabling factor for a lot of the companies that are actually working with local governments and essentially helping make are in this sort of smart cities category, and that's been interesting to see as well. Smarter transit, I think not just are companies like Remix who are helping enable transit agencies to reimagine design routes, but also, as you mentioned, sort of Uber launching its Uber movement to help urban planners use Uber data for help in city planning, and other sort of, we're seeing a host of different sort of providers here that are helping sort of transit agencies, and as we'll mention a little later, perhaps other companies that may eventually enter the fold with their own sort of unique advantages. Verizon, as we saw in that headline, has been pretty active on the M&A front around smart cities. Think about two of their most recent transactions. Both of them were geared toward this sort of smart cities category in terms of acquiring Sensity Systems in September, as well as LQD Wi-Fi and sort of the public Wi-Fi to help build urban smart hubs in November. So I think M&A is certainly something that we'll be watching as well, in terms of where we see some of the companies in the smart cities segment, especially those that are selling into government, look for opportunities, and we see sort of some of the bigger players like Verizon who have gotten involved on the M&A front. One of the other transactions that we mentioned that was in the smart city space was Google acquiring Urban Engines, which was another sort of transaction on the M&A front in the smart city space. So just quickly, some of the areas that we're watching, and there are myriad, but what will be the ultimate impact of sort of initiatives like Alphabet's Sidewalk Lab? So, Alphabet said in October, for example, that it'll help provide technical assistance to improve transit flow and services for 16 different cities, including Austin, Boston, and San Jose. We see some of their products already. Here in New York City, we see the Link NYC. On a number of notable cross streets here, and also working on Flow, their transportation coordination platform for cities. But this has been sort of a big, I think when we think about sort of the zeitgeist for smart cities, it's been certainly one of the drivers, and what will we eventually see from not just Alphabet, but some of the larger sort of initiatives, and we talked about Ant Financial, internationally doing some work, but what will we see from sort of the major sort of tech incumbents who are helping power the smart cities movement through their resources? There's a great blog post today from Nick Grossman from Union Square Ventures who talks about sort of public data platforms. And he poses a lot of different questions for public data, and one of the ones that was certainly interesting, to us is sort of, the impact of siloed portals versus real access to data. So if you think about Uber Movement, for example, as sort of a siloed portal, it's as Nick says, it's something, but it's not the real thing. And how do we get sort of actual data moving? Certainly an interesting thought, and I encourage you to check out that post which he penned today on sort of the public data element and some implications for government as well as other areas like journalism and science. And obviously sort of venture-backed opportunities for smart cities startups. We mentioned in transit, companies like Citymapper and Transit App, which are have grown to significant scale with consumers, but how might they develop and augment sort of what they do with eventual business models that might sell into government agencies? We talked about some of the work that Citymapper, for example, is doing in terms of now being able to map out different cities without sort of the open data available. Will sort of smart city startups selling into local government agencies especially yield major venture-backed opportunities? Certainly something that we'll be watching as we track sort of the space. And also for to the earlier point on GovTech, will we start to see some of the companies that have grown in GovTech move beyond through their initial market into others? So for example, Mark 483 working with police, will that eventually move to areas like jails and other areas, or some of the companies that have targeted more niche areas of government agencies who are able to grow and maybe expand sort of the market size for their offerings? So certainly a lot to think about, and we'll be doing a lot more research here in this area over the next few months. I think we do have a few minutes for questions. Definitely also email us. I'm at mwong@cbinsights.com if you want to send in over any questions about both government technology as well as smart cities, and we'll try our best to get back to you on that, and definitely do that if you do have any questions that we're not able to address here today. So I do see a few questions here. What are some of the other funds that are more government or smart cities focused? One that I didn't mention that has been active is urban.us, which is working with both startups that are help sort of shifting sort of the future of urbanization, but also some startups in some cases that are working with local governments. Life Stories, for example, is one of their portfolio companies. So that's another one outside of GovTech Fund. Code for America used to have an accelerator that was active. And there are some others that are also doing some work with a more sort of government-focused niche. But I think one of the more interesting trends is now we're seeing sort of a lot of the more multi-stage VCs who are now getting active in the space, or at least talking about the space. The other one that I didn't mention that probably should is 8VC. And Formation 8, which actually has been writing on the space for quite a while, and was the early investor in OpenGov. Also has done a lot of sort of thoughtful sort of looking at sort of the GovTech space, and just mentioned that overall. When we think about sort of any data on investments in Canada, we do actually are tracking obviously sort of what's happening in both GovTech and smart cities. Globally, we don't have the numbers here in this presentation, but we will be looking over time at some of the international markets where we are seeing more startup formation. So we'll definitely we'll definitely look more at that sort of from an international lens. Let's see here. Just trying to see what we can get to here. Can we share the slides with people on the call? We'll certainly be sharing both the slides and recording with everybody right after the presentation. So both the recording as well as the slides will be made available. Um, let's see here. I think that's all we can probably get to today. We will get to more of these questions by email. I think some of them that have been asked probably require more than just a short response here. But we'll get to more of the questions over time, and we'll get back to you if we can answer those. Again, we're at CB Insights, and as I mentioned, we'll be doing more research on the space, both in government and smart cities over time. So we're excited to continue to track their innovation in government as well as smart cities over time. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you next time.